Everybody. My paper is on the impact of Webster's dictionary on the English language and schools. Why Webster is so important to me is just the fact that I'm going to be an English teacher, and I've always been fascinated with words. There's a reason I'm an English major, and it's just because words are just something that I love, and I love the way that we can use them to communicate with each other and just really be on the same page. And I have used Webster's dictionary in Dr. Lintz's class, and he really emphasizes the word wisdom, which Webster defines as the right use of or exercise of knowledge, the choice of laudable ends, and the best means to accomplish them. This is wisdom in act, effect, or practice. Wisdom is to be considered as a faculty of the mind. It is the faculty of discerning or judging what is most just, proper, and useful. If it is to be considered as an acquirement, it is the knowledge and use of what is best, most just, most proper, most conducive to prosperity or happiness. Wisdom is the first sense or practical wisdom is nearly synonymous with discretion. It differs somewhat from prudence. In this respect, prudence is the exercise of sound judgment in avoiding evils. Wisdom is the exercise of sound judgment either in avoiding evils or attempting good. Prudence, then, is a species in which wisdom is a genius. Well, I believe that Webster was a genius and that he was wise beyond his years at this time because he was able to see the issue that was going on in our country with language and the issues with usage errors that no one else was able to see. So then the question comes to mind, why should you be interested in Webster's dictionary and its impact on schools and education? Well, the reasoning is there are just so many students and American citizens in general that have read this dictionary. And he defined over 65,000 words, which was way more than had ever been defined before. And because of his impact, his dictionary has become a staple. It's a household name. I don't really know anyone who hasn't heard of Webster's dictionary. Everyone seems to have used it at least in school or just in life in general. And he is credited for being the first to create a dictionary of the English language that was very detailed and constructed the meshing of British and American versions of English in a way that no one else had attempted because people were not yet really showing in their dictionaries until Webster did that the language had changed. It was not the same version that it used to be before America became America. A little bit of background on Noah Webster, that is also his preface to his dictionary. Webster got his passion from spelling and words from growing up being taught proper usage by his family, and he was very well educated by his family on what the proper usage of English was compared to a lot of people that were living at the time. He was also a teacher, a lexicographer, a philologist, and orthographer. In his preface, he wrote, "Soon after the publication of that work, The Speller," is what he's talking about, "I believe in the following year that learned and respectable scholar, the Reverend Dr. Goodrich of Durham, one of the trustees of Yale College, suggested to me the propriety and expediency of my compiling a dictionary which should complete a system for the instruction of the citizens of this country in the language." This, along with his experience as a teacher and watching what was going on in classrooms and how students were having so many usage errors and did not understand terms, is all things that contributed to why Webster worked so hard to create his dictionary and had such a passion for it. So I mentioned a little bit of what the problem was that Webster had to address, but basically Webster had noticed from looking at the way that people were communicating in the classroom and outside of the classroom that there was a lack of concrete, consistent definitions, and that pronunciation was very much not the same amongst people that were living in his area and areas around there. This was leading to miscommunication issues, and people were basically in schools, they were having a hard time all having the same definition and having the same train of thought. And dictionaries did not reflect the meshing of British and American English because at the time, the dictionaries were only using British definitions with British word meanings. So it didn't show that America had really the variety that was once the variety in Britain was not the same variety that was being used in the United States. And this was going to cause the issue of there not being a standard version of English. How this related to schools was that students were not being taught a standard of English which reflected the variety of English that was being used across the country. So they were getting basically two versions of English. They were getting the version of English that was in their classroom, which was more British-like. And then they were going out into the world outside of the classroom, and they were having a whole different version being put on them, different variety. And so they were having a large number of usage errors that were present, and their communication skills were just really lacking. A quote from Kelly says, "Though the first English dictionary dates back to 1604, it was Webster in his 1828 volume that was credited with capturing the language of the new nation. The older dictionaries were not nearly as informative on how to solve usage errors and did not define terms nearly as clearly as Webster did." We talked about this already, but that is a really big component of why his work was such a huge deal and such a big impact. If he had not done this, it would have resulted in the language variety becoming less sophisticated, and there would have been so many divides between those who had learned correct usage and those who did not have knowledge on pronunciation and word meaning. And this would have caused many issues linguistically with our language, which those who in our class who are more focused on the linguistic aspect, that would have been something that would have really, really messed up our language. Webster impacted education, but as well English during that time. And now, today, our amount of information that we are learning about our language that comes from schools is so much, and it was at the time too. We are getting our foundation in English from schools, and Webster knew that, and his dictionary helped with us to have a solid foundation, and the students were able to learn correct usage and pronunciation and had less confusion and more clear communication. We're able to build schemas, which in education, that is your mental blueprint of what something is, and people were able to get a mental blueprint of what definitions were in proper usage of words. Like I said, you're going to see his dictionary all over the place, and it has been that way for generations now. His dictionary led to the use of dictionaries in classrooms that were in schools all over the country, and across the country people are using his dictionary just in general, not even just in schools anymore. It's just used as a basic way of understanding a term. And his added emphasis on vocabulary became something that education now really works hard to enforce. And as a whole, we are currently in the education department really doing a lot of work to understand how to teach vocabulary to students. As time goes on and we continue the future of the English language, we will continue to use Webster's work and the definitions and pronunciations that he has used, because it has kept us all on the same page and given us a guide as to how to stay in the same standard, which we all really needed, or we were going to have so many different varieties that we were going to not have one single language anymore. Like I said before, if it weren't for Webster, we were going to go on a path where our language was going to become so different in so many different areas that we were not going to understand how to communicate with each other. And so thanks to Webster, we have a solid guide to word meaning and proper usage that is really being helpful for teachers to have definitions for all of their students to know, as well as for themselves to know, so that they're all on the same page and are creating schemas that are consistent within our community and our country.